When my grandmother died, the garden went silent. For weeks afterward, it was as though the earth itself had gone into mourning. The air lost its sweetness. The bees stopped visiting. Even the wind that used to hum through the rose trellis seemed to hold its breath. That garden was the last thing in this world that felt like hers, and by extension, mine. We had spent years tending to it together. Even when her hands trembled, she would insist on pruning the climbing ivy herself, shaping it along the brick wall that divided our land from the neighboring lot. She used to say, "A wall isn't there to keep people out, love. It's to remind things where they belong." After she passed, I kept watering the plants out of habit. The hose still leaked at the same place, and the scent of soil still clung to my palms. I didn't know what else to do with the hours she'd left behind, until one morning, a man in a white hard hat came walking up the path. He carried papers, official, impersonal. His boots left square prints in the dirt. "You the family?" he asked. "I am," I said. "Good. You'll want to be aware there'll be construction starting next week." I stared at him, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. "Construction?" He nodded, smiling the way people do when they know something you don't. "Developer's project. New homes. Luxury townhouses, I think. We've got the green light to start clearing the east lot first. The east lot, my grandmother's vegetable patch, the strawberries she'd grown for me every summer. The pear tree she'd planted the year my brother was born." "You must have the wrong place," I said finally. "No mistake," he said, unfolding the paper. "Deed's been sold. Owner's name is—" He said my brother's name. And just like that, the sound of everything, the wind, the insects, even the ache in my chest, stopped. I didn't call him. Not at first. I sat by the window that night with the light off, watching the moon turn the vines silver. In the faint glow, the leaves looked like 1,000 listening ears. My brother, Owen, hadn't been home in years. He'd left the same week I graduated, chasing whatever big city dream promised him a different kind of soil to grow in. I stayed. I took care of Gran when her memory began to fade, when her hands forgot their steadiness, when her eyes clouded with something far away. He sent flowers once a year on her birthday. Always lilies, never knowing she was allergic to them, and now he'd sold the land beneath her garden. The next morning, I called him. He didn't even sound surprised. "It's just land, Emma," he said, his voice calm and reasonable, the tone he used when he thought I was being sentimental. "You can't live your life out there forever." The house was falling apart. "This way, we both get something out of it." "We?" I said quietly. "Of course. I made sure you're in the paperwork. You'll get your share when it sells. I don't want money." "Then what do you want?" I almost said her back. I almost said the sound of the bees. But all I said was, "You shouldn't have done it." "It's already done," he said, and hung up. The next week, the bulldozers came. They worked fast, ruthless. The air filled with the smell of torn roots and diesel. By sunset, the vegetable patch was gone, and the pear tree lay broken on its side. I tried to stand still while they worked, but I couldn't breathe. The garden was dying all over again, and this time I couldn't bury it. That night I went out with a flashlight. The ground was raw, uneven, still bleeding green from the day's destruction. I knelt down and dug my hands into the dirt. The earth was warm, as if remembering. I found one living root from the ivy that used to climb the garden wall. I dug it out carefully, replanting it along the far side of the property, on the border where the developer's fence now stood, a tiny act of defiance. A whisper that said, "You can build your walls, but I will build mine too." In the morning, the workers returned. They didn't notice the line of soil that looked just a little too dark, the slender green stem already reaching up. By the end of the week, I'd planted another root, then another. I worked at night, quiet and patient. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even the neighbors. It wasn't revenge, not really. It was reclamation. Gran used to tell me that a garden always finds its way back to what it loves. I wanted to see if she was right. By the time the foundation trucks arrived, there was already a faint green shimmer along the base of the fence. Small vines curling up, searching for the light. They didn't know it yet, but the land was remembering me, and I was remembering it. By the second summer after Gran's death, the construction crews had finished the first phase. The once verdant east lot was now a row of half-built townhouses. Concrete walls rose where sunflowers had turned their heads. Steel beams replaced the cherry trees. Even the wildflowers that used to grow along the boundary had been ripped out, their petals scattered into the dirt. And yet, under the fence, life whispered back. I had spent nights planting, carefully slipping roots and seeds into the soil where the developers hadn't bothered to tamp it down fully. Morning light revealed tiny green shoots, so small they might have been overlooked. But I saw them. I nurtured them. Each one carried a memory. Gran's laughter as she pruned the vines, the taste of her tomatoes, the warmth of her hands guiding mine. I worked slowly, methodically. I wasn't trying to undo the construction. I was trying to make it remember. Neighbors began to notice oddities. A single rose vine creeping over a corner of a retaining wall. A lone sunflower sprouting between bricks. Nothing they could trace to me. Nothing concrete. Just small disturbances in the order of things. Nature finds a way, one elderly neighbor remarked, shaking her head as she walked her dog. I smiled faintly, though she didn't know why. One evening, as I knelt along the fence, tending to a patch of ivy, I heard voices. 2 men from the developer's crew arguing. "Something's growing again," one said, kicking at the dirt. "I swear we ripped out all of it." "Probably weeds," the other replied. "But it's annoying. Makes the property look unkempt." I stayed in the shadows, smiling. Yes, let it grow. Let the land remember. I began keeping a journal, documenting every plant, every shoot, every flower that emerged. I named them after things Gran loved. The rose along the brick wall became Lucille, after her mother. The wild violets in the corner became Maggie, after her childhood friend. Even the stubborn ivy that refused to stay contained was Emma's gift, my quiet rebellion. By the 3rd summer, my work was beginning to show. The new walls, once sterile and lifeless, were being claimed by green tendrils. The developers tried to clear a section, but it came back faster than they could cut it down. I'd planted underground bulbs that no one saw, creeping roots that spread silently beneath the concrete. The garden was winning, slowly, patiently, and then came my brother. Owen arrived unannounced one afternoon, stepping carefully over the new shoots that sprouted beneath the fence. He stopped when he saw me, dirt on my hands, knees stained, hair sticking to my forehead. "Emma," he said, almost a whisper. What are you doing?" "The garden," I said simply. It needed me. He laughed, a hollow sound, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "It's gone. The land sold. The house? Everything. You can't—" "It's never gone," I interrupted, planting a new ivy root along the base of the fence. "You can sell deeds, sell bricks and concrete. But you can't sell memory. You can't sell what grows." His face darkened, but he said nothing. He didn't know how to argue against roots, against patience, against the quiet persistence of someone who had tended the earth for decades. I continued my nightly work, slipping through the shadows to plant along the edges. Under the fences, even beneath the newly poured sidewalks, it was a secret rebellion, a garden of whispers. By the end of the season, green tendrils were curling over the townhouses, small patches of wildflowers sprouting in cracks where the cement had failed to hold. The developers grumbled. Neighbors murmured. No one knew who was responsible. I did, and I would continue to do it, one summer at a time, until the garden could no longer be ignored. By the 4th summer, the garden had grown beyond the edges I had first planted. The vines I'd carefully tucked along the fence had begun to climb higher, reaching toward the townhouse's sterile walls. The ivy was thick now, dark and stubborn, creeping into corners the developers thought unreachable. It was no longer just a secret. It was visible. I spent mornings walking the property line, pruning and guiding the plants, whispering to them as Gran had taught me. "Grow where you are needed," she would say, her fingers tracing the veins of a leaf, and grow they did. Morning glories unfurled along the balcony rails. Honeysuckle crept through broken siding. Tiny blooms appeared in the cracks of concrete that had been poured carelessly. Even the developers began to notice. One afternoon, my brother Owen showed up, pacing along the newly built sidewalk. His suit was too crisp for the heat, and his hands trembled slightly as he held a folder of papers like a shield. "Emma, what is happening here?" he demanded. "The plants are taking over," I said calmly, wiping dirt from my hands. "You're sabotaging everything." I shook my head. "No, I'm reminding the house who it belongs to, who it remembers." The tension between us was electric. He wanted ownership in cold metal and printed contracts. I wanted life, memory, and care, measured in green shoots and tendrils. "This is madness," he said. "You can't fight progress with weeds." I smiled faintly. "You forget. Gardens don't fight. They endure." That night, I returned under the cover of darkness with my watering can and a bag of seeds. I planted stubborn little things along the wall, beneath the porches, even behind utility vents. They were my army, quiet, patient, and relentless. By morning, the green had begun its subtle conquest. The wall was no longer bare. It was stitched with life, winding its way up and across the property, softening the hard angles of construction. Neighbors began noticing. A child stopped to point at a cluster of violet blooms peeking from a corner, asking her mother if it was magic. A couple complained to the homeowners association about weeds overrunning their property. The developers, frustrated, sent letters to my brother, demanding action, and Owen came back to me. "You've gone too far," he said, anger and disbelief warring in his voice. "No," I corrected him. "I've gone exactly far enough." I invited him to walk with me along the perimeter, showing him the roots I had planted in secret, the vines climbing walls, the small flowers that had returned despite concrete and neglect. "It's alive," he murmured. "It remembers," I said. "Your money, your contracts, none of it matters. The land, the garden, it remembers my grandmother. And it remembers me." He didn't respond. He simply stared, as if trying to comprehend something both simple and impossible. Life growing where it shouldn't, reclaiming what had been stolen. By the end of that summer, the wall was no longer a line of boundary. It was a living testament. Passers-by stopped to admire the vines curling up the townhouse walls. Children played in the patches of wildflowers I'd scattered. Birds nested in the ivy I'd planted along the roofline. The garden wasn't just surviving. It was thriving, and Owen, he no longer tried to fight it. Instead, I noticed him hesitating at the fence, watching the green tendrils grow, as if realizing that some victories weren't fought with contracts or authority, but with patience, care, and devotion. The wall had begun to reclaim itself, piece by piece, year by year, and so had I. The quiet rebellion was no longer hidden. It had become inevitable. The 5th summer arrived with heat that made the soil fragrant and heavy. By now, the garden had grown beyond my quiet interventions. Vines climbed over fences, around corners, even creeping into the balconies of the townhouses. Flowers had returned in swaths of color. Wild, untamed, impossible to ignore. It was no longer subtle. It could no longer be ignored. Owen came again, this time with lawyers and developers in tow. "Emma," he said, his voice tight with frustration, "you're trespassing. You're sabotaging the property. I've warned you," I didn't answer. Instead, I led him along the perimeter, showing him what had grown since last year. "Do you see this?" I asked softly. "It's weeds," he spat. "No," I said. "It's memory. It's care. It's persistence. You sold the land, but you can't sell what grows from love." The lawyers shuffled uneasily behind him, their papers rustling like leaves in the wind. I walked slowly, pointing out each carefully planted patch, the ivy tracing the edges of the broken wall, the wildflowers sprouting through cracks in the pavement, the pear tree, now small shoots from roots I had saved, reaching for the sun. "It's alive," Owen admitted, his voice breaking. Not with pride, not with awe, but with the weight of something he couldn't control. "It remembers," I said, placing a hand on the brick wall Gran had once pruned. And so do I. The developers gave up by late afternoon. It was impossible to clear the growth without tearing the walls, destroying the townhouses, or, worst of all, erasing every trace of the garden's resilience. Even Owen finally understood. Not through confrontation, not through anger, but through patient observation. The garden had already won. I spent the rest of the summer working openly, not hiding my presence, planting new seeds, pruning, tending, and shaping the wall into a living masterpiece. Neighbors stopped to watch, children asked questions, and slowly, respect replaced suspicion. By late August, the garden had become a sanctuary, both beautiful and unassailable. The vines wrapped around the walls like history embracing memory. The flowers stretched toward the sun, each petal a silent statement. This land belongs to those who nurture it. Owen never fully returned to the property, but he no longer tried to interfere. He learned eventually that ownership isn't measured by deeds, contracts, or money. It's measured by care, persistence, and the life you cultivate. And in that truth, I found peace. Standing on the edge of the garden wall one evening, I traced the familiar curves of the ivy with my fingers. The sun dipped low over the townhouses, painting the flowers gold. I could hear the hum of bees, the rustle of leaves, the quiet echo of my grandmother's laughter in every corner of the property. The garden had become more than a wall, more than a rebellion. It had become a legacy, and I, its keeper, finally belonged there too.